almost done working my way through the 1944 force pool editions, and I noticed some interesting things. Italy and Japan have essentially nothing. The US and Great Britain, well, the Commonwealth, get a whole bunch of points. I'm sure the French don't get a hell of a lot because, you know, they're expected to have surrendered. But, you know, I mean, we're still getting, this is maybe half the size of what the Commonwealth got in earlier years. Same with the US. Germany, well, Russia gets a good sized force too. Germany gets approximately the same size force pool, but they get the, you know, sort of Volkssturm type units. They're getting some really crappy infantry added to their force pool. Again, that makes sense under pretty much any policy you might have. It's like I missed a couple of these. I don't know if I owe oil for those. I found one, some with the Brits too. But baked into the game is the simple fact, especially for the U.S. force pool, where, you know, their reserves and Russia's reserves were never quite reached. The Brits, it looks like it's mainly planes and boats. Presumably, Germany and Japan should have force pools capable of being reached that have greater navies. The game doesn't allow it. You know, maybe some additional extension would give them a bit more, but I find myself, you know, with almost nothing left for Italy in terms of new stuff coming out, and they have most of their force pool on the map. Japan, they actually have most of their force pool on the map as well, and are not getting anything new. So they're recycling old units, which are pretty good in terms of the Navy, but, you know, there's almost a guarantee that if the Western Allies could wait things out, if I hadn't launched an attack over here, right, I think it was, yeah, that Japan's going to fall behind and will eventually get defeated just based on that. Same really goes for Germany. I don't have more to put into the field, and you can see what I've got on the field is having trouble making its way through Spain. Now, granted, I have extra depth there, and over here in Russia, I don't have as much as I should, so probably some of it should be over there. But you can see where force pool limitations might actually become a factor in some kind of really pathological game of this. I just think it's more of the game that's saying, you know what, the Western Allies are going to win or, you know, the Allies, because throw Russia in there, are going to win this one way or another. The Axis has no chance. And given that the victory conditions are conquering an entire map, well, maybe you could convince me that it's possible, without winning the war forever, that the Axis could win by reaching, you know, the minimal requirements, which is really everything. You know, they have to take Australia, they have to take India, they have to take the European map. And that's what the Allies have to do too. It's just, you know, the one thing they don't have to do is they don't have to take anything on the American map. But it really does call into question any possibility of that actually happening, just because, you know, if I can hold on to Britain, eventually I'm going to overwhelm the Axis, and then they won't have everything on the map, because London is one of the key centers that has to be taken. And eventually, I believe the force pool and attrition using that and everything will eventually, you know, cause the Western Allies to win, even if they're behind in production capabilities, potentially. Yeah, we'll see. Certainly, you know, if Japan's able to hold on and Germany's able to hold on, I could see things getting kind of ugly. As long as they're causing enough attrition to the Allies to prevent them from ever landing that killer blow. But what do you have then? You have a, well, you know, we didn't win, but we didn't lose either, really. And I would take that as a victory for the Axis, given the way the game's kind of slanted. Now, obviously, if you cheat as much as I do in favor of the Axis, maybe that evens it up a little bit. 1944 opens up nothing on the political side, basically. Italy had a war to pay for, that's it. We actually do have some Norwegian units that were coming in. I guess they got bumped off in a shock result or whatever that came in this turn. So they're not done yet, and that's a pity because it's going to be tough. The weather is absolutely terrible. Bad enough that the Brits took a land move for a number of reasons. One, a little bit of movement down here, but the biggie is trying to cover Siam and the threats that we have down there. That, you know, I don't know how we've been ignoring them so long, but we're in a lot of trouble at this point. And we also we did a combined move with the U.S. Mainly used the boats to ship some more troops into Spain, and also went with some patrolling for submarines over here. It's kind of a problem. Subs are like the rest of the naval activity, you know. Nobody really has to worry about naval units unless they go do something. Once they go try to do something, you have to deal with them. The one exception is you have to worry about the potential of a combined move with a naval with an invasion. And if that happens, well, you can get caught with your pants down if you don't have any patrols or anything out there. The Axis turn, a little bit of repositioning in Spain, which is really threatening things. I sailed out, and that was probably dumb. Especially since I caught that, gee, I cheated when I sailed out because I sailed from 2 different ports, but screw it, you know. There's this constant sort of, I'm always going to be violating the limitations. It's a matter of, I wasn't sure if I was doing a land or naval. or a combined or naval. I didn't really check. I thought 2 would be reasonable when Germany only has 1 naval move. And then they both were out here, and I realized I really need to move some of my land units. And at that point, I kind of decided, I don't really want to do a naval move at all if I only have 1. I need to move some land units, and I think I actually wanted to move more, and this naval action looked stupid to begin with because I'm actually outnumbered here. You can see there's more British ships, but I want to cause some attrition, and that's why I went out. But, you know, then when I tried to figure out which ships came from which port, I couldn't figure it, so I said, screw it, leave them out there. They'll make it home, you know. It's probably worse for the Germans than positive. Over here, the Japanese made another concentration on the Philippines. This failed because their airstrikes didn't work. We were set up with a lot of ships out here in the South China, and that weakens my capability to react to anything the U.S. does. But here's the problem. The U.S. can't send its force over here to wipe that out. They could send a small portion of it, but they're not going to be able to send the whole thing. And that's where you get kind of these, okay, break up into different task groups working in different areas, except that it generally, in the historical situation, it would be very easy for the Japanese to put everything down in Truk, which is in a nice central location, and they can react everywhere. So they can send their whole force somewhere, so that makes it hard for the U.S., unless they have numerical parity with each of their wings, to even think about doing things in 2 different places. And also, you can't do an island hopping campaign in 2 different directions. I don't think. Certainly not while you're doing anything over here. The U.S. combined move gives me 4 land moves. That could do it. 2 land attacks. That could get the invasions in place. and 3 naval moves. I mean, it's conceivable, but I've got no reserve there for other actions to take there. Of course, I could be doing other things on other impulses, but, you know, it just doesn't, it doesn't really strike true, and I don't know how to fix it. Especially with this dual map situation. If you're on 2 maps, you know, the U.S. wants to do naval actions over here, they want to do land actions over here. Well, if they do Normandy, that means they do nothing in the Pacific. Nothing. I mean, they don't even send the boats out, right? You can't afford to be running a whole land campaign and then let it pause. Of course, that may be used as some sort of argument about the sort of slowdown in the attack in France, but, you know, clearly the two aren't actually related. It's not a matter of, oh, let's halt in France because we want to do something over in the Pacific. No, you know, the 2 different theaters were run very differently. They weren't relying on the same resources, the same command chains, the same transport lines, anything. So there's no reason to conjoin the 2 in the way that this does. The Western Allied turn, most areas are pretty bad in terms of weather still. Got the snow in the Med, it looks like, yeah. But the northern monsoon zone is still good. And the U.S. sent their entire fleet out. We're going to have that massive engagement, probably wreck this Japanese force here. Now, that leaves everything open. But what are the Japanese going to do with it? Well, I don't know, because Truk is northern monsoon. I'm also planning on, but we'll see if it gets sunk, an invasion of Formosa. But that's at risk there. Over here, well, the Brits had to do a land move, actually. Just trying to react to what's going on coming out in the Malaysian peninsula and such not. Sometimes a split force works, sometimes it doesn't. Here it's fine for the U.S. because I had a big enough force over in the 4 box that it could pretty much handle the Japanese. Now, why would I want to be in this split force? That's a good question. It doesn't give a hell of a lot of search advantage. It means it adds to my surprise bonus is what it does. And the surprise only ended up being a 2. So we're going to be doing an air battle, which is what I'd want to do. I don't want to get some big, at least one big Japanese battleship. Most of the battleships weren't fast enough to get there, the big ones at least. And that's really what determined the U.S. action, along with, hey, we're probably not going to get another action because it's not going to come till there. So let's destroy the Japanese fleet. We won't be able to come out and do any punishment if the Japanese do manage to get off an action. We could send a task force out to the Marianas or something to try to defend it. But what the hell good that might do, because, you know, I can be attacked from the Bismarck Sea just as easily or whatever. You can't defend the sea. All you can do is go hunt people who are in it. This should be pretty damn ugly for the Japanese. And then after some ASW work was done over here. Now this is kind of weird. You can't just attack subs. So if there's no convoys, if the sub doesn't choose to attack convoys, you're not going to be able to attack subs. But if you get a surprise result, you can force them into combat. And that's what happened here. And then we're having the showdown here in the Bay of Biscay, where the Allies decided to go for the larger of the German fleets, which isn't bad. They could have gone after the Swedish fleet. This is all, well, no, it's not all Swedes. There's some old German battleships in there and stuff. I view that as pretty unimportant to attack, so I'm going to go after this. But I'm not sure, even though there's a numerical superiority here and a slight surprise advantage, which could be a column shift, I'm not sure how much my numbers are going to be advantageous, because we got German battleships, and I don't think there's any Allied battleships here. But cruisers are remarkably effective compared to the battleships. They're able to gang up and take them down. Close thing, but the Germans took hits on their battleships. Putting them in the damage pool, it means they won't have them for a couple turns. But, you know, rather than taking sinks, they figured they'd take the damage. With all the light ships, it's easier to just say, okay, screw it. And really, the Allies only lost one. Because of the surprise factor, they reduced the losses to themselves. So they didn't take any damages. They took 2 destruction checks. One ship destroyed, one ship damaged, and I think one abort that happened. The Sheffield. Aluminum hull. You know, the Germans were making the decision by taking the hits where they did, they're getting out of there. Mainly they didn't have the staying power unless they could bring those crappy old ships into play. They might have been able to in another round. It's just, this was not a fight that's gonna, this is a fight that's not gonna destroy Allied shipping capabilities, and it might destroy the German shipping capabilities, which means the Allies can then go down and compete with the Italians directly. Right now, the Med is an Italian lake. I still have to cope with these guys. There's, the French might end up surrendering immediately, or they might end up being willing to fight. I stepped away from playing for a little while, and then I had one of these thoughts that if I don't video it at this point, I'll probably forget it completely. But it has to do with the days of decision, different alignments. In particular, I started thinking, and this actually had to do, I was reading a World at War's rule book and was considering some aspects of how days of decision handle some things. If there's a French election, whatever, if there's a French New Order effect in place, let's say moved them out of capitalist and towards fascist, would that make France an ally of Germany? I don't think so. I really don't. There are possible situations where France and Germany could have perhaps come to some sort of agreement. But I don't think that they revolve around Germany, around France becoming a more fascist power. They revolve more around France becoming a weaker democracy, to tell you the truth. The fascist side of France would probably be as strictly anti-German as is possible, to the extent of that may be what would be required to move into the Rhineland on their own, for example, which France could have done. Militarily, they were capable of it, but politically, they were incapable. But a fascist France might have been able to do that. And it's just this kind of, gee, you know, the game would then almost automatically align them. They couldn't declare war on each other. They win together, etc. And I think that doesn't capture the spirit of the actual likely governments that would be in place. I think Le Grand Care does a much better job. Of course, it's from within the war itself. So like a fascist government in France would fight on. It would just, you know, have a different government form with all the benefits that accrue to something like that. Anyway, it's one of the flaws that I see with the DoD model because while it may be the case that to the democracies, and only really to the democracies, this may have been seen as a struggle against fascism, and that may be more propaganda than anything else. I don't think the U.S. would have accepted a democratic Japan invading China any more than they accepted Tojo's Japan invading China. But there may be something to be said for the fact that democracies may not be able to mobilize for war quite as easily in the 20th century. I'm not so sure about that. Certainly World War I, the democracies had no problem upping the war footing. France was very much in favor of a war with Germany, and the population was behind it, and the democracy was behind it. Just as, you know, other wars have been able to get the populace behind them, and that's all that's needed for a democracy. So I don't see ideology as really the issue here. It may be, you know, if you had a fascist France, they would probably be aligned against Germany. If you had a socialist France over on the Marxist side, that probably would have been very weak in terms of pursuing a military situation, as opposed to Stalinist Russia, which did make some attempts to reach out and oppose the fascist tide. I'm not so sure that a French socialist would be in that same position, because the truth of the matter is that Stalinism was less about communism or socialism and more closely aligned to the personality cults of Hitler or Mussolini in a lot of ways. It was focusing all that power into one place. And that's actually very easy to oppose someone else, whether they're of that nature or a different nature. It's just, that's, you know. So having the Ruskies as a different ideology is actually kind of weird comparatively. But anyway, even if the economic system had some significant differences between National Socialism and communist Russia. All right, some random babbling for no good reason. But Axis activation. Now that this is no longer blizzard, it's just snow. We're pushing into Spain a little harder, did some bombing, and had some successes moving forward. Spain is not going to be able to hold, I don't think, which is really a shame because A, Gibraltar, and B, this was the intended staging place for the U.S. forces. Greece would be a lot harder to use as one. One reason I didn't bring them into the war is they'll just fall to the Yugoslavian garrison pretty much, or at least not be able to cause any problems. That's one nice thing about the garrisons, is that they force you to put troops where, you know, in places that prevent stupid things from your enemy, you know, like a little naval invasion that could just start causing real problems if you didn't have things properly defended. And it's very easy not to have things properly defended. Look at, you know, my Black Sea, if that opens up. Nothing much happening over here on the Russian front. The blizzards are still rolling here. The Italians made an attempt, but they didn't actually roll the attack dice. They just tried to bomb their way in. But this is the biggie. The Japanese are going for the battle again. My feeling is, if I can't win, you know, the big naval battle or whatever, what am I doing? You know? So we ended up, it's all facing each other. The Americans, I saw the Americans as a weakened position because they were in the 3 and 4 slot. I could have done the same with the Japanese, or I could have brought even some stuff that's slower into battle. But instead, I got to get my convoys over here to get my oils coming through. I got to get convoys in the China Sea. So if I'm doing some naval action, I might as well push things here. The Brits are still sort of sans convoy in some senses. They don't have all the convoys they need. So they've got stuff coming out of India, but whatever's in Australia, they're not going to be able to haul. No, they can still produce in Australia, though. There's just one factory, I think. Pretty crappy. Oh well. So this is what a massive carrier duel looks like. First of all, I set up all the ships. You can see these are all the Japanese carriers. The US carriers are here and here, because I've got them sorted by which sea box they're in as well. I got to keep track of that. In addition, I have to keep track of which units are upside down, which I kind of do by inverting them like this when I need to see the numbers. You'll see that with some of the planes. Some of the US planes are inverted. Those are guys who did a ground strike, I believe. No, bomber support going into Formosa. Okay, and then we have a string of the fighters facing the fighters up here, and you have choice as to what you want to call a fighter, what you want to call a bomber. Obviously, with some planes like this one, there isn't really a choice, but with others, it's a close call. I tend to like to overweight the bombers. It could be a real questionable thing, but the thing is, you get clear results from here. So bombers that aren't good at fighting, you can say have been cleared, and they're going to hit their target no matter what. Well, assuming they get through the anti-air fire. And then if you have, you know, some that are good fighters, they still kind of count as fighters in terms of if they get attacked by the enemy fighter cover, they have some potential for shooting the enemy down. It depends on the type of plane, though. If they are actual fighters, which will be the guys with kind of the level, and some of the planes actually are like this one, and you're using them for their bombing capability, they lose one off their fighter. But here it looks like everything is some form of bomber. I think these are. It's hard to tell, but they have kind of that tilt so that they no longer look like fighter planes. And now we resolve a bunch of air-to-air combats until basically all the bombers are either dissuaded from fighting or get to drop their bombs. These guys aren't going to get to drop their bombs. These guys all will if they make it through the fighter cover. So we'll be matching up the two lines of fighters. Now here, the U.S. has 7-8 strength. I can't use these guys because they're under half. So I have a total of 8 strength facing 6, 7, 8, 9 strength for the Japanese. So even though the Japanese have a lower valued fighter in the lead, those higher valued backup planes, or the larger number of backup planes, give them an advantage. They're actually at a +1 on the table. That can change though, as planes get shot down, etc. And then we've got the, you could end up clearing a fighter and it ends up getting a bounce on one of the bombers. All that stuff that we saw in some of the other tactical air stuff. Okay, let's see what the results are. An air battle this size, there's a lot of die rolling, and I've spent maybe 5 minutes, maybe longer, fighting to get to this point. Right now, we have the airplanes lined up now. There have been bounces, which is why some of the better planes are in the back of the line. So this has 2, 3, 4 to 2, 3. So right now the Japanese are at a slight advantage. The planes that I've got down here are ones that have been cleared, so they'll be able to bomb, well, they'll be able to face the anti-air fire. And the ones that are back here are ones that got aborted. They're available for the next round of combat, if there is one. We'll see how that goes. Usually you fight around and you say, wow, I don't really have another, I don't have a chance if there's another naval battle, or I'm at a disadvantage, so I'll pull out of here. Usually one side or the other has the advantage. This is a fairly closely lined fight, although the air war, the Japanese, I think, have the slight advantage. But the U.S. has more targets that they can take hits on. So if there's not a big surprise, they're not going to start losing carriers. They're going to lose some of their lighter ships. The Japanese have a lot less padding. Down to this point where the U.S. is the only one with a fighter left. They've got a bomber that's still not cleared. They've only got 2 cleared. Japanese have 4 cleared, and a whole bunch that as soon as this fighter goes down is a problem. The Japanese actually chose to take out a bomber rather than hit this fighter. So this fighter has to run the gauntlet of these bombers. And in order to attack them, if it chooses not to leave them pass, and I don't think it can actually, it's going to go 3 against 4, 5, 6, 7. It's facing, 8. It's facing a harder fight than it would against the fighter. So I took an abort result on the fighter. Normally I try to keep normally I take my hits on my fighters because, you want to do the damage to the ships. That's why you're there. But sometimes, you have a good fighter or something and you don't want to knock it out. So you reverse things. It might be a good idea to actually put some weak bombers in the front, because when you take AX, DXs, and AAs and DAs, the destruction and abortions, you have to choose your front fighter or bomber. So if you have a powerful bomber and a powerful fighting capability bomber and a powerful fighter in the front, you've got to give something good up in either case. Whereas if you put some cheap piece of shit like this in the front of your row, you can, when you get selection choices, you can take that as your kill. Of course, that makes it an easier choice for your opponent. They'll take the one that you're not, protecting. But something like this can protect your entire line of fighters against everything except the bounce results, which are only an optional rule. So if you're not playing with them, you're not affected by that. Once the fighters are all gone, which is the case, all the bombers are coming through. And then we do the anti-air value. We count that all up, look it up on here against the particular number of bombers. If there were surprise results, they could be used here, but with only 1 point of surprise, it's essentially an even battle. Neither side has any advantage there. So then we look up and we do this special magic die roll thing on the AA column. And I'm not sure I agree always that one thing is better than the other, maybe probability-wise it is slightly. But shifts on that column tend to be pretty crappy. Although sometimes they're very worthwhile in my view. Again, you know, switching, I don't know, from like 1, 3, you roll 3 dice and you get the positive 1, to negative 2 out of 4. You roll 4 dice and you get the next 2, you get the 2 lowest results. I'm not really convinced that this is significantly worse than this. But then when we get down to here, 2 dice, the lower results, 1 die out of 2, the higher out of 2, that's beginning to look more valuable to shift down. I usually don't like giving away, and it's hard because it's a very smooth chart. The other one is too, which is the other place where surprise points could be spent. Not that I have any to spend, but if whatever gets through, then I'd add up its air value. So this would be 3, 5, 6, 7 on the air to sea, and compared to the total number of ships. And if you shift either way in these in that chart, you'll also find that you're generally not, you know, looking at, oh yeah, that's the difference between, you know, it's not a difference of 3 ships or something like that. It may shift the results though towards killing versus damaging and stuff like that. So kind of like the anti-air, it's sometimes a tough decision whether you're actually getting an advantage by shifting in your favor. Huge surface fleet protected the U.S. quite heavily. They took down 4 Japanese fighters, whereas the Japanese only took down, I think, 1, or bombers. The Japanese only took down 1 of the U.S. bombers. So now the force differential between these 2 groups in an air combat becomes a lot more, I don't know. It looked like it was really balanced in favor of, or unbalanced in favor of the Japanese. Now it looks less so, and we'd have to run the gauntlet of this huge surface fleet again, shooting our planes down. On the other hand, another round might be nice. Now, in terms of actual losses to the ships, the Japanese are taking 1 destroyed, 1 damaged, 3 aborted. Of course, they might avoid them if they get their defense roll. Whereas the U.S. is getting 3 destroyed ships. And destroyed ships are a pain in the ass, because if you do your big stuff that's likely to roll a saving throw, you have to pay for it again when it goes in the repair pool. The Japanese have been choosing to do that. I'm not sure the U.S. wants to put their most expensive stuff in the repair pool, because sometimes those ships often cost a lot, like 5 points to repair, as opposed to the normal 2 or 3. So if you take a light ship and you get it sunk, it may actually cost you less to build the whole thing. Of course, it'll take you 10 turns instead of 2, which is what the Japanese are looking at. Try to turn their ships around pretty quickly. They don't have a lot of force pool to develop anymore. They're sticking around. The U.S. actually took let's damage the big heavy ships, because rebuilding them is cheaper than, you know, in terms of time than other things. But that means we're going to roll for another round of this. And again, this could go very badly for the U.S. because they have a split force. Split force is always dangerous. And we get 1s for both. Now the search number's higher, so that means actually the convoys are going to be included in this battle as well, but otherwise it's the same as before. There's not really any there's not going to be any surprise on that value. Because we both basically rolled the same amount. So we'll be hitting another air battle there. I don't think anybody is going to take convoys intentionally as a hit. Both sides are having trouble getting enough convoys on the field. They'd rather take regular ships, but you never know. Anyway, those are available to hit if you want them. We'll set up another air round and see what comes of it. This went heavy on bombers again. You know, the idea is, the goal here is to sink the ships, not to hurt the planes. Hurting the planes are pretty easy to recover new ones of, especially since you actually get a lot of your pilots back during these battles. You get them during the air-to-air combat. When you go to the anti-air table, you're going to lose your pilots in general. They're orange results, which will only work if you're shot down over a friendly base, basically, during a port strike. But you might question why the U.S. is fighting this. It's not good for them. It's not really a balanced situation for them, I'd say, overall. They're doing some damage to the Japanese. There's no question about that. but not quite as much as they're taking. But they can absorb the losses a little bit better. And if they get a lucky roll, they get to bring this to a surface combat and they get to roll up the entire Japanese fleet. It's worth the risk. It's worth the attrition losses. On the other hand, for the Japanese, it's worth the risk too, because we have to start hurting the U.S. Why? Well, I don't know. Because I say so, basically. I mean, I can't really justify what you can do when there's two big navies floating around there. If they're not going to collide with each other, well, you know, one side is going to be able to do something and the other side may not, you know, may be able to react to it and pin your navy down and fight it. But basically, if the U.S. Navy is weakened sufficiently, they can't do any more invasions until they recover, because they really need to be able to protect that invasion force and to have the heavy battleships and everything to use the gunpowder to make the landing. So if only one side can make an invasion, then they pretty much have a free hand to do so, and they can grab back territory in the case of the Japanese, or in the case of the U.S. If they're the ones who win it, they can start, you know, winning some of these battles that are maybe out of anybody's reach. Like the Philippines, it's out of anybody's reach right now. The Japanese have a slight advantage there, but very quickly the U.S. could start shipping planes into there and causing a real problem. If they weren't tied down in Spain, they could do something about it. But unfortunately, they have to take land moves over there. And of course, the Japanese have to take their land moves to operate on the continent as well. So the big naval actions aren't really being that effective. But if one side does get a dominating position, maybe they'll be able to turn that around, I think. Kinda. After this round, the U.S. only has, I think, two planes left. They lost their great fighter, actually. And they lost 4 battleships, all taken as destroyed, but battleships are hard to destroy. So they've taken a total of 7 damaged battleships over here in this battle. They have to get out. They can't stick around. And, you know, it's kind of a, okay, so what was the net effect? It's not a hell of a lot. No carriers went down, but a lot have been stripped of their planes, which means the U.S. carrier presence, in terms of being able to do anything dominating in the next turn or two, is probably very, very weak. So the Japanese can use some smaller task forces, sending, you know, maybe half their carriers with each, and do a couple of different tasks. If I only had tasks that I could really do. I can definitely do a port attack if I get myself into position for one. And in fact, I happen to be sitting here in position for one, which I may well want to have done. Since I pushed the ships out this turn, so I probably won't get another shot to do it. If I stick around out here, I could blow the crap out of Hong Kong. There's a bunch of British ships here. Of course, there's British carriers there that haven't been brought out into play because the Brits have had to take land moves. So they're just sitting there, kind of sitting ducks, but not entirely. They do have air power to support them. I can use interceptors here. The thing with the port attack is I'm not at any risk, so I'm just sending an attack in to strike them, and the only planes they can send out are their own defensive planes. It's not like this big naval battle that happened here where it could have gone either way. A port attack, the only thing I'm risking as the attacker is my planes, and the Japanese have a much easier way of getting their planes back on the field in the Pacific than the Americans do. The Americans, and definitely much easier than the Brits, who, without the Med, have to go all the way around Africa to get anything onto the board. So if I could get those British planes out of there, I'm probably saying the Brits aren't going to be a major factor in the Pacific for quite a while, as long as, you know, the Mediterranean's blocked up. So I've definitely got some interesting choices available. The U.S. is withdrawing, but are the Japanese going to stick around there in the 2 box, which isn't necessarily the best place to be, and do a port attack? Because the problem is I don't have any Marines left anymore. I've used them all up. Some of the Japanese planes I think were used. No. That was only the U.S. planes. So, yeah. And if I somehow get another turn, which is impossible, the Allies might get another turn, but I'm not going to, or another impulse this turn, but I'm not going to get one. Okay, so, you know, it would save oil to leave at least part of this fleet out there. There are additional U.S. carriers coming in, though. Another whole little flotilla of them. I mentioned this before. I have a terrible time winnowing these suckers. So this guy is a 1-point plane. The 0-point planes, let's just say I'm going to keep because they're pointless not to. But this is a 1-point plane. It turned blue back in 41. It's not terribly good, but there aren't all that many blue planes at any given time. So I'm going to have to kind of winnow through what gets destroyed and try to figure out, is there anything I want to get rid of out of this pile? Because I have a lot of carrier planes left over here. And some of them may be much better, and I don't want to, you know, keep pulling kind of crappy ones out. But on the other hand, you know, turned blue in 41 may not be that bad. It's, yeah. Something like this is a 0-pointer. So I certainly won't get rid of that. And it's a hard decision what to get rid of and what not. You know, a 2-2, it's not a great plane. It's not good for anything. But it's kind of nice to have bombers that have some fighter capability, because then they just don't get shot down automatically. But ones with not a lot of bomber capability and not a lot of fighter capability, I can probably get rid of them, but I got to make sure that I have enough blue, that pale blue, because I just sent like 4 or 5 of those light carriers that can only carry pale blue planes back to Japan. It's a hard, you know, amount of data to process to figure out what you want to get rid of. Things are worse for the U.S. than I thought. I forgot to put out the Japanese second naval move in their combined move that they were doing, which involved shooting the subs out of Java here, Surabaya. And we managed to disrupt their entire supply line going into Truk, which is where all the ships had to withdraw to. And they could have gone to Hong Kong, but that's also troubled. Neither one has a supply line to it, which means these guys are not going to unflip. They can do kind of an emergency evacuation type move if they get activated or so. Well, if they get invaded, but only if they succeed in a die roll. So there's actually an opportunity for the entire U.S. Navy to get really hosed pretty badly over there if I don't get another U.S. turn. And that's what we're going to check right now. Actually, the Soviets have a turn too over in their first set. So on a 1 through 4, the turn ends. And it does, which is a problem for the U.S. because these are not unflipping. When rolling for Partisans, I found something icky. There is a Siberian partisan result here. And lo and behold, there is indeed a Siberian fist. That means these German forces do not count for the 25 Russian one. I've been counting sort of the backup forces here, the ones that aren't in zones of control, and we probably had a Soviet partisan at one point or another that I was able to discount, because I don't have a lot back here and haven't for a long time. Oops. You know. And we did get partisans in China, because the Japanese don't have much in China that's not in a zone anymore, and Chongqing, which is an important location with a factory value and 2 resources, got captured. Conceivably, I could have captured the stockpile of resources and destroyed them, wherever the hell they actually are. I tend to keep them in an unimportant location by design. I could actually have them split up into 3 different places or whatever, just to stockpile them, to prevent the possibility of partisans causing a problem. But this is causing some additional problems for the Japanese. But man, this is scary. The Allies may want to take a first move to make sure, well, no, just supplying it isn't good enough at this point. The unflip phase only happens at the end of your turn. Now, a headquarters could unflip them, and there is a headquarters there, but I think. But it can't unflip very many. It can only unflip 2, which is not really sufficient to do me any good whatsoever. So that's, at the very least, it's going to delay the U.S. withdrawal of this fleet by a turn until I get some supply in there. And I couldn't have run further. Could I have gotten actually, because I could have gotten the fleet safely elsewhere. I think I would rather... See, I needed this because I was out in the 4 box, 4, 5, 4. I could get some guys down here. Plus, I didn't know the results of those battles, like the chance of the Japanese taking out both of my supply. And this is the only one that mattered, I think, because I don't have any supply cutting this way. It was pretty low. We push into the March-April turn. The Commonwealth is really hurting here. I had to pull, I think, 10 oil out of my reserves. I'm down to like 21. If this continues, you know, it's not going to work. I can't even get oil from the U.S. because the connection was broken here. I'm building a bunch of convoys, though. I built 8 British convoys, 7 U.S. ones. We should be able to get this restored. Japan's managed to get its situation restored. The real problem is probably that, well, it's that the German subs screwed things up out here. So I've got to be more careful. I've got to stop them. That's really caused a lot of damage. And it's not really, you know, I've got extra convoys kicking around down here. So it's not like it's that I absolutely need to build more convoys. It's that I need to protect them better, because they got really hosed. The Germans actually came out breaking even in oil, which is pretty good for them. The Japanese, I think, gained a couple oil, but in part because I kept this big force out here. I'm planning on airstriking that sucker if I get a chance, which means the Allies probably want to grab the first move if their initiative allows it, which it likely will. They have a huge advantage there, just to save that fleet. But then, okay, if I save that fleet, what do I do with it? I can't face this. I can't face this, probably. We can't tell for sure. These carriers are all lacking planes right now. Now, they'll have some, but it's not going to be as powerful a force as I left back here. So, we don't know. Japanese subs are pretty much devastating in terms of quantity. Whether or not they're going to be successful at doing anything too important, that's hard to tell, because other than right in here, there really isn't a lot of, there aren't a lot of places where the Allies need to get supply. I need to get it to truck, but outside of that, I'm not sure there's anything that that devastating. Now, if the Japanese are able to make a landing at truck, this war may be just about over, because some of these ships will just be destroyed, etc. Which just shows something, which is, if you cheat enough, you can actually even win with the Axis. I'm not convinced that the Axis has a fair chance in this game, no matter what. That you might be safer, you know, ignoring the actual victory conditions in terms of trying to evaluate how well you did historically. The victory conditions the Axis has to achieve are really the victory conditions the Axis would have to achieve to survive and succeed. You know, conquering Europe and Asia. With those resources in play, it would be very hard for the U.S. to be able to come back and do anything. But what's really cool is that the bar that's being set there is the accurate one. So you have to play it in such a way that you're actually aiming for historical objectives. Japan's goal of, hold the perimeter only made sense so long as Germany might win in Europe. If Germany wins in Europe, then they can divert forces elsewhere. But if they're not going to win in Europe, that hold the perimeter is obviously a losing strategy, right? Now, I haven't had to use that strategy, and I've lost what little perimeter I had, but I've been able to, by focusing on the Navy, kind of hold the U.S. maybe in more check than I would have been able to if I was focusing on building up fortresses and such. That's a decision that players can make, and obviously cheating in China and elsewhere perhaps has definitely affected the situation, but cheat on both sides, so don't worry about it too much. I think the preponderance has gone towards the Axis just because of them being on the offensive, and the kinds of things that I've cheated on, allowing the activities limits to be ignored at vital times, forgetting the reserves. Wow, Anyway, as we creep into this next turn and presumably better weather, we'll see what happens. But one of the things that I'm doing is I'm actually engaging in some of the strategies that I feel the Axis should have been able, could have been able to do. A heavier focus on the China situation, to the ignoring of developing, a stronger position in the Pacific. That grabbed the Dutch East Indies early. I really like that maneuver if you're allowed to get away with it. Some games don't allow that. And so, in terms of the overall victory conditions, the thing you want to compare it to is, say, the Third Reich series of games, which has kind of the, Germany wins if they hold out till this date, Japan wins if they hold out till this date. Those might be more believable and balanced restrictions, but it ends up causing you to play from the very beginning with only one goal in mind. I'm going to lose this war as late as I can, and that can cause some really, really strange decisions. Now, those strange decisions may actually comport better with reality. For example, Germany trying to hurt the Brits early on might make more sense under those conditions, but then not actually trying to go through with a sea lion or whatever. Japan's defense of the islands. The problem is the Allies can skew that by directing in one direction or the other. So I actually really like the viewpoint that WIF takes, I think, which is, well, screw it, man. You can't win with the Axis, but this is what you should be trying for. After I figured out what my purchases were for the turn, and just how many or how few carrier planes I'm going to have, I think I decided, it was on my walk to go dancing, that I was going to, this can't be here, that I was going to not be port striking the Brits. They're an interesting target, but their planes aren't all that valuable. I'm a lot more interested in hitting the U.S. Navy. Now, the disadvantage of not hitting the Brits is the British Navy becomes available to maybe hunt down some of my convoys that I need. If I port strike them and screw them up pretty badly, they're probably not going to be able to sail anywhere. But I think my target is to hit this rich force here now. Unless I get a surprise roll, which I think is fairly likely, but it probably won't be too significant. I'm not going to be sinking a lot of carriers, but I'm not sure carriers are what I necessarily need to do. stripping away the battleships is just as big a deal. Those carriers are going to be tough to get back to the U.S. It's going to be a couple of turns out anyway, which is about the same as if I just damage them. If I actually sink them, it would be a big deal. And oh boy, I'm not in good shape after dancing. Just physically, it's not like I'm hungover or anything, but it's not too far because I spent so much energy. I'm just very, very fatigued. Right, so the Axis choice is over here. The Japanese have sent their fleet out, preparing for that port strike. There's not much the U.S. can do about it. It has taken all the carriers, though, off of any kind of patrol type position. And it has gotten rid of the possibility of a port strike here. And it's kind of a one shot, right? Because all the planes flip when they do it. So they get one attack against this, which may or may not do much. In order to cover my supply routes, I've thrown a bunch of air out. Doing a combined move, it gave me more air moves. And I did a little bit of skittering around up there for the Germans and Italians. Italians did a combined move. Nah, I don't know if they did combined or land. I think they did land. A little bit of air action. They may have done combined. They didn't do many land moves at all. A little bit of air action, try to get this. You know, there's snow, but that only reduces it by half. And there's only so many impulses you're going to get. So since I only get to use air attacks once per, I only get one air attack per land move. I figured I'd fire one off now, even at reduced odds. I can always upgrade, flip my headquarters to get air units back. I actually didn't do shit over here. I'm not sure what I can do, but I didn't even look at it. Yeah, it shows my level of excitement about a front like that. Yeah, I can't do anything. But over here, Germans managed one attack cutting through here where they managed to get their artillery to knock out some of the Spanish, and I may actually flip a leader because artillery is becoming more effective. It really feels like World War I, and it's because of the limitations and how low they are. I did a ground move. Okay, well that means I get, what, 3 airstrikes? 4, something like that at most. Land 3 airstrikes, 3 ground strikes, and I have this humongous air power that I could throw in and get my odds up, maybe another level here, there, and whatever. But in the mountains and such, now I just have no ability, and the only way I can get through that crap is to ground strike the units, flip them over, and face weak forces. And that's really how I feel about every assault. You get to see the big advances that sometimes happen in World War II, only if you get to have unlimited actions. And in order to do that, you need to spend an offensive chit. If you're spending offensive chits, well, the Germans would be getting what, more than half of their production, but there's no way they would be able to be building up the navy that they feel they need and other such things. They could have this dominating army because they've been spending a significant amount of their points on the navy each turn. But I'm not convinced that it's very hard for me to pay that much money for something that only lasts for one impulse. If I got that over multiple impulses, yeah, it would be more tempting. But with just one impulse, no. And I don't even know whether the weather is going to be good. It takes time for an offensive to churn around. So we're fighting a World War I game, as far as I'm concerned, because of this chart. Now, is it also because of my inabilities? Maybe. Maybe the willingness to spend 15 to do that is an important factor. But given that I've cheated and accidentally done it, and it didn't get me shit, basically, I just don't buy it. So you just don't see the advances that I expect in this game ever. I saw them over here, but I was cheating like mad, essentially. So I don't know. Anyway, the Russians, the Allies, feel fairly secure. This is a hell of a road bump right now, but these guys are going to have to pull back, and we're going to have to give up Barcelona here. There's no question of that. And, you know, how long we can hold Spain is really up in the air. But, you know, these guys down here in the mountains, even out of supply, I can't do shit against them. You know, I look and I see like 3-to-1 attack. And then I've got the weather modifier that gets me down to 2-to-1. If I threw in just about all my planes, I could probably get it up to 3 or 4-to-1, which is generally an assault that I'm unwilling to make without some pluses for flipped units. And that's against, you know, one unit where I have several hexes engaged on it. But it's because of the mountainous terrain. This would have been just as hard, and we had a lot of trouble getting through there when I was cheating even. Not like the less active player, the defending player, doesn't suffer from these limitations as well. They certainly do. So for example, the US had to make a choice. Hey, do I want to move most of my units in Spain, try to find better terrain, better positioning to defend, or do I just pick a couple of them and take a couple naval actions? And I went with the latter because there really aren't that many better places to be, but there's danger of you know, cutting off the Spanish forces into little sectors and then destroying them piecemeal. Of course, as we see here, you know, maybe the expense at trying to destroy surrounded units is just too high, so the hell with it, because they can't really move. They'll flip over. The danger there, though, is things like Barcelona serve as a supply source. But that's being lost because the US pulled back. The Brits had to take a land action for that reason, because they just had still too many moves that they had to make. So they didn't get any, and down here, they didn't get any naval action at all, which means I left these guys here. I did some air, didn't I? Nah, I did some air movement into Spain to help try to stiffen that, but I didn't have any fighters that could reach, so it's just bombers going in there. How much value those have? Well, we'll see. They could totally screw up a German attack, actually. So for the Axis, the only way to make a port strike is essentially to do an air action, because there's just too many planes involved. The efficacy of it, hard to judge. A bunch more battleships took hits. I don't think aborts drive you out of the port, so that would be an advantage for the Americans, actually. So a lot of the American ships are damaged now. They took some carrier damage. That gets them out of there. You know, if there wasn't a way out, they wouldn't have to leave. But these are ships that couldn't sail on their own unless they got port struck, so it's kind of weird. But at the end of this phase, at the end of this turn, it looks like the US has supply. Now the Japanese could have interdicted the supply instead, which might have been a better move. Except these ships all have to, at least the carriers all have to sail back. There's only like 2 planes in that force. But it's a one-shot, because all your planes get inverted. So unlike a naval battle, I'm done. You know, so that air action more or less meant the Japs didn't get to do anything. They did some bombing with some success here. Over in the Russian side, no success. I may want to unflip some of those units. I haven't gotten to that. For the Germans, they took a land action. The Italians took a combined action. The combined action was necessary so I could get enough bomber raids in here that I might actually succeed. Didn't work. Over here, the Germans did an attack on this hex, but they were beaten back, which is why there's a flipped unit. More units were flipped, but they used the headquarters to recover. Meanwhile, in Spain, they actually cleared a hole through here and are cutting through this way. They took out the British fighter there, and are kind of, they got a breakthrough up here where they're kind of cutting around, just trying to undermine that situation. The Swedes lost their battle to the Norwegians, and what else? Because I took a combined action, the Italians can't really do anything in Africa. One thing they did do that was interesting, they moved some subs. They're going out to the Indian Ocean, and they actually took out the British convoys over in the Red Sea. This is why you don't want Suez falling, because the Italian Navy can, you know, it's bad enough you lose the Med, but there isn't really any shipping in the Med anymore. But now the Italians can slip out and start screwing with the British shipping. And that's something I should have done earlier. But I didn't think about it. Or didn't know where my subs were hiding. I had to spend some time finding them. The turn didn't end. It wasn't very likely to. So now we go to the Russians, who have something. They really don't have too much of an opportunity to hit back, because the Germans were able to recover. With the Allies especially, it's almost impossible to do anything this turn. I don't have that big naval move to make, and that, you know, the big combat to undertake. So I've been, you know, I shifted some naval forces, great. I have been shifting land forces over here, mainly using combined actions for the U.S. and pure land for the Brits. A little bit of repositioning here, but this looks pretty hopeless, although I'm throwing more troops. Let's not invade Portugal by mistake. Oh, I called Persia into the war, but then, I mean, there's no cost to that, because they're a co-belligerent and close enough on the track that you can call them in if they were declared war on. I figured there may be some advantage to it. I don't know what the hell that might be, but because I can't really defend in here. I don't have supply because there's no sea supply. So I'm just kind of blundering around with nothing to do. Is the problem with the Allies. I have no grand plan because I don't have the force to push it. I'm trying to hold things off here. Here, I want to turn the tide again. You know, it felt like I was doing pretty well, and now the Japanese have come back and really hosed me. If I can get, you know, a big naval force out there to challenge them, maybe I can win that battle again. My intention was to go into Japan first, and I've expended a lot of effort on that, and it's kind of failed. Okay, well, the turn ends on an Axis impulse where very little happened. I made a couple more bombing attacks, trying to get some purchase, some artillery coming in, nothing hit. And when I looked at the odds, I'm just like, well, even where it's not rainy weather, I'm not getting good odds. You know, here I could get like a 3-to-1, but defensive air support could pump, or I'm sorry, 6-to-1, but defensive air support pumps that down to 3-to-1. I'm just not going to attack at that, and that's kind of what I'm facing up here with the Irish over here, all over the Russian front, the Italians hitting there. None of them are good odds. Here I knew I'm not going to get better odds than I got, so I went with it, and that's going to expend oil, but I at least took something out. You know, when you're facing just one unit. Now the Italians are actually streaming over towards Libya. I probably should have done this earlier, but I figure if I've got the supply on the coast, I should be the one fighting on the coast. You know, I might as well go forward. The Brits aren't going to be able to go beyond here unless they get the Navy here. But, you know, when I'm doing Italian land moves, if I've got the supply there, I might as well just keep moving. That could cause problems, though, where my troops get caught out of supply. The Japanese did probably the most effective thing this turn. The Germans can't because, well, they had to do land moves because they're fighting over in Spain. The Japanese used their subs, and I don't know, they took out like maybe one convoy damaged, but they've pretty much broken up. I notice I'm still not going to have supply here. I don't know what happened, but none showed up here, which it had to be in. And I don't have the numbers for that. I'm not sure if the Japanese managed to hit that somehow, you know, on an earlier impulse, or if I just screwed up and put my supply there, but I can't tell. I thought I had enough to dredge everywhere, but I think somehow this maybe got knocked out. I can't imagine by what, but the Japanese certainly would have hunted that one had it been present, even though there's a U.S. sub here. I don't know what the U.S. sub is up to. Probably repositioning. But anyway, that means Still no supplies over here in Truck, which means the Navy's not going to get out yet. And really, this has been sort of a failed turn for everyone. Nobody's managed anything. The Allies managed to pump a few more troops into Spain, and that's really about the extent of what's happened. And the Italians are hunting over here with their subs. We're going to have to take ASW a little bit more seriously than we have been. The subs are scary when you're relying on sea supply. And, you know, that's a reason the Germans might want to send their subs out. The problem is, the Germans spend an action sending their subs out. That means the Allies can go hunt them for an action. It's a free action. Or the Allies can say, screw it. They really don't have the fleet to deal with the subs here. That's the problem. They have the British fleet they could have sent out, but they keep saying, oh, no, I need a land move with the Brits. Very, very frustrating to be this limited. Anyway. Time to start building, I guess. Economic and strategic choices of where I can move pieces are the economic choice in terms of production, the strategic choice of where to move pieces, beginning to make me feel like I have to give up Spain as the Allies. I just can't afford it. I can't take the actions that I need to in the Pacific to keep it alive, you know. Do I really want... Yeah, basically, I have to cede either the Pacific or Spain. One or the other is the way I'm looking at it because of the restrictions. But it's also the economic restrictions. The simple fact that in order to rebuild the Navy that I lost, I can't build any more ground units. And I can't start shipping my militia, the National Guard or whatever, out of here because Mexico can come in and attack me at any point. And in fact, there's a real danger of that happening. There's a real danger of the war opening up with Chile and Argentina moving against Brazil, and then possibly even against Venezuela, with an intention to reinforce Mexico and make it a tougher nut. The war is really coming to that hemisphere, quite possibly. The only real saving grace there is the Axis finds itself spending all its points on its own military, so it doesn't have the points to throw into the political options. Japan is actually accidentally overspent. I'm going to have to rectify that. But Japan doesn't have the cash to bring things in. Germany does. Germany can bring Argentina in or Chile into the game. But on their own, I'm not sure how valuable they are. I'm considering it. There's no question there. Because I think between them, they might be able to defeat Brazil. And over here, you know, I'm just looking at what I have. I have no capital ships anymore. I've got to get this aligned. I've got to get my supply through to there. I actually found what may have been the issue. There was a convoy here, and there's this. And I'm wondering if that convoy was supposed to be out here. But I can't fix it because the Japanese would have had an opportunity to sink it. Yes, well, no, there's no sub versus sub battle. I have no, yeah, I do have an idea. Anyway, I ought to get this somewhere in supply. Because that was just out at sea. It's able to find a place. And you know, I have enough shipping to get to here. It's not a matter of that, it's a matter of how it's deployed. You know, I'm trying to consider, do I want to pull this ship out of there? I certainly don't need two, do I? It's not like I have any resources channeling through here. So I'm going to abort one of those back to Honolulu, I guess. And, you know, I've got an extra one here I don't need. It's just this stupid... I've got two. The counter mix has been forcing me, you know... I can't use ones for supply because there's a limited counter mix of one 2-point ships. Now, this is kind of weird because I complain in 7 Ages about the, hey, using the wrong counters. You kind of expect to see one, I think it was in 7 Ages, you kind of expect, actually, it may have been in Days of Decision, you kind of expect to see 1s with 2s on the back, 3s with 4s on the back, etc. But that can get you into real trouble. So if you just need to spread out a supply line, you need a lot of 1s and 2s in this game. In the original, you needed 5s and 10s. And the problem is, when they came out with the additional counter sheet, it wouldn't help. Now, they would have to make things really even more confusing than they are. With the Days of Decision sheet, I have a few extra 1s and 2s, but I was using even some of those and was kind of pinned close. And now I probably want to abandon this as well. Well, that's a 2 with a 3 on the back. Yeah, that's the Days of Decision crap. I probably want to try and spread my supplies out more, because I'm really losing the war due to logistical constraints. So for example, the Western Allies can't push further here because I don't have a convoy in there, but I haven't been able to take convoy moves because I've needed to do things, you know, do I want to give up India? Right? I needed to do things on the land front to react, and was not able to get enough naval moves ever to be able to hold things. The Italian subs are spread all over hell and creation because I don't have an engineer. So I just had to build an engineer to try to fix. Port Said would be one example of a port I could use. Over here in Kuwait, I've captured that. I could use that as a major port. I don't have Aden, so I can't use that. But yeah, I mean, as I capture major ports, I can't make a singular sub center, which means I have to take a naval move to move all my subs. Or in each combined move a couple.